Okay, good morning. We are on Kuftes Vav Beis 115b in the Gemara. 1, 2, 3, 4 lines in the bottom of the page, the beginning of the line. So the next step in the Seder that we're discussing, sorry. The next step in the Seder is the recitation of the Haggadah itself, which begins, of course, with the 4 questions. Everything we've done till now is setting ourselves up for that, including invoking curiosity from the children, because we have to get questions asked, as well as good morning, yeah, really. As well as what else did we discuss that sets ourselves up for this? The kiddush that comes prior, the dipping of the karpas, and now we're talking about setting up our plate, which, as we learned already in Talmudic times, would have been done at this juncture, as opposed to the way we do it, where we have the table, our plate set up before we begin the Haggadah, even before Kaddish. In Talmudic times, they would have done so before the recitation of the Haggadah. Why? Well, as we explained yesterday, and we're going to see a bit more today, that when one recites the Haggadah, one has to recite it over those elements that are relative to the story of the Haggadah. So the matzah, the maror, and the charosis. And in temple era, you would have also had your piece of your Pesach offering, right? Because those are all the things that are relative to the story, right? We conclude when we say the story, as we'll learn soon in the later Mishnah, we conclude with saying, whoever hasn't spoken of these 3 things is not fulfilled his obligation. The matzah, the maror, and the Pesach, right? We don't have Pesach today, but the matzah, we touch the matzah, or we raise the matzah, depending on the custom, when we say that because we're reciting the story over these elements, right? So, with that, so we already discussed a few days ago the presence of the maror and the charosis there, and then moving the table away to invoke curiosity. And the maror and the charosis, whether it's got to be in front of just the leader or in front of each person individually. And we learned that only the leader needs to have it. Now, there's one more component that's required before we recite the Haggadah, so that it's there in the presence of our recitation. We have the matzah, we have maror, we have charosis. The 2 extra things, the beitza and the zraya, we explained, which are to remember the 2 offerings. That's present, but not necessarily relevant to the fact that I have to recite the Haggadah over these elements, right? They're just there at the table, present in remembrance, right? And there's one more element, one more component, and that is that the matzah be broken. And that's yachatz. Before we recite the Haggadah, we do yachatz, we break the middle matzah. So that, and we'll learn today why, so that when we recite the Haggadah, it's in the presence of this broken bread, broken matzah. This is what we're doing today. And then the Gemara that will follow is going to be on the, sorry.
So we also learned, right, that only the leader has to have those things present, right?
I think it's true of the matzah as well.
Right.
The matzah was one of those things we mentioned yesterday or 2 days ago. Yeah. Matzah, maror, charosis. So the matzah only has to be in the presence of the reader, right? Today, every person is a reader, but in the original form, one person reading, everybody else listening. Excuse me. And the next Gemara is going to be the ingredients of the charosis. And then the next Gemara is going to be the recitation of the Haggadah itself, beginning with the 4 questions. But before we go to that, we're going to learn the halachas of setting up our kaira and the ingredients of the charosis to match what we learned here, which will take some time because there's quite a bit of halacha about that. And then we'll get back to the Gemara, continuing on the recitation of the Haggadah. So 4 lines at the bottom of the page of Kuftes Vav Beis 115b. Amar Shmuel says, Lechem Oini. The Torah says, the verse is printed on the left, at least in my print of the Gemara, where it says, you shall not eat chametz on it, on the Pesach offering. For 7 days you shall eat matzos. And then the Torah describes matzos as lechem oini. Then it goes on to say, because you left Egypt in a haste, so that you remember the day you left Egypt all the days of your life. That's the verse in Deuteronomy 16. So what does this word lechem oini mean? Lechem means bread, but the word oini is an enigma. Sorry?
Bread of the poor.
So bread of the poor is going to come up, but here's the enigma. It's pronounced oini with a cholam, but it's spelled without a vav, which is ayin nun yud, which could be pronounced as ani, poor person, although it's not pronounced lechem ani. It's lechem oini with a cholam. So it's a bit of an enigma, and the Gemara is going to tell us about that. So Amar Shmuel said lechem oini. The pasuk says lechem oini. What's the meaning of lechem, bread, oini, that is oini? So explains Shmuel, lechem is the kind of bread, sha'oinin alav, upon which we respond or recite dvarim, a number of things. So lechem oini actually means bread of response, in Shmuel's opinion. So matzah's got to be there when you respond to the child and tell him the story. Lechem oini is the bread of response, the bread over which you respond some stuff, namely the story, in answer to the kid's question.
Verb ana.
Yes, for the verb ana, to answer, right? And if you want to say the noun of ana, it's oneh with a chaylam. So it says oini with a chaylam.
With a what? Sorry?
Chaylam,
What's that?
the vowel that says oi. So it's oini. The noun, the verb of that is ana, oine. Right, the noun of that is oine. Okay, so lechem oini, bread of response. Okay, so now we already have this indication that the bread's got to be there when you retell the story, right? Because the bread of response. Tanya Namahachi, we've learned in the Mishnaic text to back up Shmuel's statement. Shmuel from the post-Talmudic era, from the post-Mishnaic era, from the early Gemara era. So now we're citing to a verse that source that predates him to back up his understanding, which is, quote, Lechem oini, the verse says Lechem oini, Lechem she'oinin alav dvarim harbe, the bread over which is responded many things.
Interesting. Somebody who's poor is missing something. Someone is missing something. What is he missing? Missing the answer.
Yeah, interesting. He's poor in literally poor in knowledge. Yeah, interesting. The only addition that this Mishnah text has beyond Shmuel is the word harbe. I don't know what that means, but I'm just pointing it out. Shmuel says bread over which you answer or respond things, and the Mishnah text says bread over which you respond many things. Not sure why the word many is added, but it's there. But the Mishnah text adds some other interpretations to the word lechem oini, bread of oini, which we so far, one translation is bread of response. Dover acher, another translation, lechem oini. It's pronounced lechem, bread, oini, but oni ksiv. It's written without the vav. Aleph ayin nun yud. Now aleph ayin nun yud, when you write the word oine, which means to respond, you write it aleph ayin vav nun hey. But when you write the word, right, you have two vowels that can make oi. Either you put a vav with a dot on top, that's a cholam, right? Or you just put the dot in the top left without the cholam, right? Now when you read the Torah, there are no vowels. So when you read the Torah, all you see is lechem and then ayin nun yud without the vav. So we know to pronounce it oini with a cholam with a dot in the top left of the ayin. But because it's not written out with that vav, that would clarify for you that it's exclusively a cholam. It takes that vav out, leaving you with the ayin nun yud, which you can also put vowels as ani, putting a comments under the ayin. Okay, so oini, it's indeed pronounced oini with a cholam, which means to respond, but ani ksiv, it's written without the cholam, it's written without the vav, meaning we can also read it as ani, poor person. Ma ani shedarka leprusa, just like a poor person, it's his way to have not a whole bread, but only a piece of bread, only a portion. Af, so too, top of Design top of 116a. Af kan, so to here, but prusa, you should only have a portion of bread. All closing. Okay. So because the Torah calls it poor man's bread, so we have two translations of the word achamoini. Bread of response has to be there when you respond to the questions, and bread of poor person, which is to have only a portion of bread. Okay.
Maybe that would explain half the broken piece.
Sorry?
That explains why it's broken.
This is the yachatz. This is the source for yachatz. That before you recite, as we're going to learn this Alter B'Shulchan Aruch, before you recite the Haggadah, you have to have that poor person's bread,
Or meaning
the broken piece.
not
Now,
the matzah.
It's not broken for the Haggadah. What's it broken for? It's broken for the bracha. When you make the bracha, thanking Hashem for the mitzvah of matzah, and eat matzah, you have to eat lechem ani. You have to eat poor man's bread. So you have to eat the broken matzah too. You have to eat the broken matzah. When you eat the matzah, it's got to be the poor man's bread, as the Torah described it. But so far, we don't necessarily have, how many matzahs do we have on our plate right now? One broken piece.
Yeah.
Right? We haven't been told about anything else. Right? Now let's look at Rashi, all the way in the top right, in the top right margin, you'll see the Rashi. One line in, sorry, like not where it says Mesiris Hashas, but one line in. So the one that wraps around the Gemara's text on the right.
Here.
Yeah. So he quotes the Gemara, which says Af Kama Prosa. Here too, you also have to have a piece. Yeah, and it says Levarech ala achilas matzah. You need that broken piece in order to recite the bracha ala achilas matzah, in order to eat matzah. Because the Torah is commanding you that when you eat your matzah, it's got to be lechem oini, poor man's bread. So you have to make the bracha ala achilas matzah. You have to thank Hashem for the mitzvah of matzah and then fulfill the mitzvah of matzah with a broken piece. Continues Rashi. V'shtei shleimos maisi. You also have to bring 2 whole matzahs. Why do you have to have 2 whole matzahs? Mishum, because berachas hamotzi, for the bracha of hamotzi. When you eat the matzah on Seder night, you make 2 brachas. One is thanking Hashem for bread, as you would any other time you eat bread. This happens to be matzah bread, but it's still bread. And therefore, you're thanking Hashem for eating bread, and you're thanking Hashem for the mitzvah of matzah. Because here the mitzvah is to eat this bread. So when you make a bracha thanking Hashem for bread on any Yom Tov, how many breads do you have to have? 2. So Pesach night's no different. So you have to have 2 breads, 2 whole matzahs. But then you also have to have a broken one to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah. Thus we have 3 matzahs. This is the basic halachic reason why we have 3 matzahs. Yeah.
Symbol is also very beautiful because let's say a poor person, somebody who very often has a broken heart.
Yeah.
The whole idea here is
Sure.
Back to why does he need an answer? Because he's an answer.
Yeah.
He's asking for an answer.
Yeah.
Of the interpretation.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to finish the halachic thing so we get that clear. Okay, so it continues Rashi. Pesach is no different than any other Yom Tov. When one has to make the blessing over 2 whole loaves, 2 whole breads. And therefore you have to break off from one of the whole matzahs. So how many matzahs do you have to eat when you make the mitzvah, when you do the mitzvah matzah? 2. You have to eat the broken one, because that's your mitzvah, poor man's bread. But because it's a regular Yom Tov night, you have to have broken off from one of your 2 whole matzahs. Yeah. Then you have to have, so when you eat that kazayas, or actually we do a kazayas of each, but at least a kazayas that you're eating there, the all-size portion, some of it comes from your broken matzah, and some of it comes from one of your other 2 whole matzahs.
And you have to hand it out.
And then you hand out a piece to everybody from that, just like you would on a regular Friday night, on a regular Shabbos night, right? You have to give a piece of your whole matzah to everybody, right? Certainly to your wife and your children. So to add to this, what we do is, so again, what do we learn? For the bracha of hamoitzi, you have to have 2 whole matzahs. For the bracha of thank you Hashem for the mitzvah of matzah, you have to have broken, but you're also eating from one of the other ones, one of the other whole ones. So what do? We hold all 3 matzahs when we make the first bracha for the mitzvah of hamoitzi.
But they're all whole.
The middle one's not whole.
Oh, the middle one is broken.
It's broken. So I have 3 matzahs. I have 2 whole ones because it's regular Shabbos. I have to have 2 whole ones.
Yeah.
I got to make the bracha hamoitzi holding 2. It's a regular Yom Tov, I'm sorry. We have to have 2 whole loaves. I'm holding 2 whole matzahs. Plus I'm holding the middle one, which is broken because that's going to be what I'm eating right now. And when I make the bracha hamoitzi, like any Yom Tov or Shabbos, I have to hold 2 whole loaves, which is what I'm doing. Then, when I make the bracha, thanking Hashem for the mitzvah of matzah, which matzahs am I going to be eating for that mitzvah of matzah?
Broken.
The broken one, and only one of the whole ones. So I drop the lower matzah, and for the second bracha, only hold the top 2. Because those are the only 2 that are going to be fulfilled presently in this mitzvah of eating matzah.
So that's bracha you won't make on those.
The top 2. Even though the Shulchan Aruch, even though the Alter Rebbe writes, we're going to see when we get to the Rebbe's Haggadah, even though the Rebbe writes in Haggadah from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch that when you make the bracha hamoitzi, you're supposed to have in mind the sandwich that you're going to be eating from the 3rd matzah on the bottom. But nonetheless, to make the point that the mitzvah of matzah that I'm about to do is only being fulfilled on the broken one and some of the top whole one, I drop the lower matzah when I make that bracha, thanking Hashem for the mitzvah of matzah.
Which one do you eat first?
So the first one you eat is the broken one, and then some of the top one.
But underneath the top.
The one on the top, which is whole,
Right.
the middle one, which is broken, a piece from each.
You eat the broken one.
You actually take a bite into both of them simultaneously. That's correct. That's right. You stack them together simultaneously and take a bite simultaneously together. That's right. The mitzvah of matzah from broken, the mitzvah of matzah from being broken, and the mitzvah of hamoitzi from the whole one. Because you have to make hamoitzi on two whole ones like you always do on a regular Shabbos. Follow? So we actually do a kazayas mitzvah. We try to fulfill is to do a full olive-sized portion from the broken one and from the top one. So that way we like do the hamoitzi and the mitzvah of matzah in completion. Although at the basic minimum, at least the kazayas combined from both, which is important because when you break your matzah, if you break it where the smaller piece that's left inside your kaira is too small, you may not have a kazayas from that. So you should break it where at least there's an olive-sized portion left behind in your broken matzah. And even more if you want to share some with your family. At least a little bit to your family.
They don't need to fulfill that.
They do fulfill the amounts, but not necessarily of your matzah exclusively.
Of
But they should have some of it.
Of that particular.
But they should have some of actually your whole matzah. Just like on a Friday, on a regular Shabbos, a regular Yom Tov, you have your two loaves, and you give everybody a piece of those two specific loaves. So likewise, you give everybody, or at least your family, from that big matzah you have at the top, give them a little piece of that, and then they can combine it with the other matzahs to get to their olive-sized portion.
They only need the piece from the top, not the broken one.
Ideally from both, actually, but certainly from the top one for the hamoitzi for the lechem mishnah, for the lechem mishnah. Yeah. Furthermore, as Tosfos cites here, there's a Gemara in Brachos which says, "Maniach haprusa be'shtei hashlemus," that you put the broken matzah in between the two whole matzahs, which is why we break the middle one, because when you make the bracha of lechem mishnah, which is the bracha of hamoitzi, and you're making it over two loaves, part of the idea is it should be apparent that you're making a bracha over two complete whole loaves. You're always supposed to make the bracha on the most beautiful thing, right? There's all kinds of halachas. If a person has one broken matzah that's made of a superior wheat and one loaf of, let's say a slice of bread made of a superior wheat, but a whole loaf over inferior wheat, let's say barley, which one should you make the bracha on? Because you always make the bracha on the most prestigious of them all. And a whole loaf is the most prestigious. So if you're holding the two matzahs now to fulfill that injunction to make the bracha on the most prestigious of matzah because it's whole and complete, then it has to be looked that way too. So you're hiding the broken matzah in between the two whole ones. That way, its appearance is I'm making a bracha on two whole loaves. Snuck in there's the broken one because if I want to do matzah, matzah has to be broken. But I'm still holding two whole loaves, the two bigger matzahs. And this is why the middle one is broken, not the other ones.
Sort of hide it.
Because you're hiding it. It's right. So you make the hamoitzi on your two whole loaves, you're like hiding the brokenness. And that way the bracha is done on the prestigious big matzah.
Like the idea Shabbat, I think allowed. Not to shave the olive.
Something like that, yeah. It's one of the reasons, yeah.
What about the one that was dropped?
That's
one?
for, meaning drop the top one instead of the bottom one?
No, don't drop any.
Okay, so you're right. You could in theory. And we're learning from the Rebbe Sagoda that the idea is to make a distinction and to demonstrate that the top two are the mitzvah of matzah that's being fulfilled, because the bottom one's going to be for koirach, for the sandwich. And as we learned, sandwich is really an extension of maror, not an extension of matzah. So to make a distinction that the top two are being used for the mitzvah of matzah and the bottom one not, we drop the bottom one. Yeah, it's very, very specific in detail to cover all the grounds of the halacha. Okay, so we had so far two interpretations to the word ani, which gave us this whole halacha of yachatz and how to set up our hakaira with three matzahs, because you have to have two whole ones and then a broken one, right? And it has to be present while you recite the Haggadah, because you have to recite it over the poor man's bread, which is the kind of bread that you'll fulfill the mitzvah of matzah on, right? So it's got to be present. And if you got to break the middle matzah before you start the Haggadah, right? But the truth is that as far as the Gemara goes, you could bring a broken piece. You don't have to break it there presently. Why break it? Why not just bring a broken piece? In theory, you could.
That may raise questions as well.
For the children. It's one of the reasons. To do it at the Seder to raise questions from the kids. So it's another thing we do for questions. We remove the plate, we dip twice. What else do we do? We fill up the second cup of wine before we eat.
Move the table.
Move the table away. We've dipped twice. We've dipped once. We filled up a second cup before we start eating, and now breaking the matzah, as well as, according to one opinion, washing before we dip is also to raise questions.
Again.
That's right. That's right. Okay, there are other opinions. We'll get to them. We'll see all that. Okay, so 2 translations again. Bread of response. You have to respond recitating over the matzah. Lechem oni, and lechem oni, poor man's bread. Yeah, these 2 combined, as we'll see from the Shulchan Aruch, as we just kind of laid out, is why we're bringing the matzah presently now before we start reciting the Haggadah. Because you have to recite the Haggadah over the kind of matzah that you fulfill your obligation with, and the matzah you fulfill your obligation with is a broken matzah. Okay. Now the third one's there because you have to have 2 matzahs when you make the bracha. Now there's a third translation to the word ani, which doesn't get to how you eat it, which is what we're talking about now, eating it broken and having it present when you recite the Haggadah, but it comes to how it's made, which is Davar Acher, 4th word on the top line of Kuf Tezayin Amud Aleph of 116a. Davar Acher, another translation to the word Lechem Ani. So one is poor man's bread has got to be broken. Davar Acher, another interpretation, Ma Darka Shel Ani, just as it is, the way of the poor person. That Hu Masik, he lights up the oven, the Ishtay Oifa, and his wife bakes. Right? Why does he do that? Why does he? What's unique about the poor person who's lighting it up and she bakes? Because he is worried. Rashbam explains this. He's trying to preserve fuel. He's worried that if let's say if she was doing it alone, so she lit the oven, lighting it up with wood, right? Then she goes to make her dough. By the time it gets back, she may have lost the flame. Will have to light it again, and now they wasted fuel. In order to make it go quicker, in order to save fuel, he lights. So the second it's ready, she can throw it into the oven and preserve every ounce of fuel that they have.
This only is basically interpreting the idea of scarcity.
Exactly.
Because of scarcity.
They're rushing. So Afkan, so too here with respect to the matzah, also Hu Masik, he likes the oven v'ishta oifa, and his wife throws the matzah in because they want to bake it quickly. Not because of scarcity, but because of not letting it become chametz. You want it to be as fast as possible. So here it's a description of not the way we eat the matzah or treat it at the Seder, but the way it's made. In that the same way a poor person cooks in speed to preserve fuel, we also cook in speed to defend from it rising. What's interesting about this statement here that's very different than us? Well, how many of us have made matzah? I never did. Anybody here make matzah? You buy it in the factory, right? They do this whole speed process. But the way the Gemara puts it is the people themselves are doing it. And this is indeed the case. Until very recently, actually.
Yeah.
Within the last few hundred years, where it's become the practice that we have these communal ovens basically that get to like 1500 degrees and the matzahs are baked in seconds. But back in the day, not so long ago, there are even chuvas about this in their shaynim, Ashkenazi shaynim, all kinds of chuvas about people making matzah in their house. So it seems like people would kosherize their kitchen the night before when they search for the hummus. Basically, that would be the day that you have to remember they don't have processed food and commercialized food, so they don't have wafers lying around that you have to like go clean your house crazy for. The only bread they have is the bread they ate, and that's it. There's no freezer preserving stuff for weeks on end. So how long does it take for them to check their 2-room house and to clean it? One day. So when we do our search for the chametz, that was their entire cleaning. That was it. There's nothing else to throw out. There's no saving bread. We put things in the freezer. We have wrappers and we have cans, and we can keep food for weeks on end, no problem. It didn't exist in the old day before automation. So they had 2 little rooms, and they're searching for the.
They didn't hire shliach to rent out their sell their.
No, there's no selling chametz.
No contract.
Selling chametz only became. That's right. Selling chametz is also a recent invention of a couple hundred years. When getting rid of chametz today would cost tons of money. Factories throwing out some bread and things, but before the old day, that wasn't the case. I mean, no one sold chametz. The night of the search, you literally searched your house, literally got rid of whatever crumbs are left from your chametz, and then you kosherize your kitchen. And when you kosherize your kitchen, what do you do the next morning? made matzah with the same flour and water you used yesterday. Today, the flour you buy in the market is already chametz because they treat it. So most of the flour you buy is already chametz because they treat it and whatnot. Right? Which is why the whole idea of shmona matzah is, and they guard it from the moment it's harvested, then it doesn't get treated or wet or anything. The flour you buy in the market today is already treated. But in the old day, the same flour you used yesterday to make your full-on bread, in the same oven you made your full-on bread, the next morning, the morning of the Har Seder, 14th in the morning, you kosherized your kitchen the night before, the next morning, you're making matzah in your house with the same flour and water that you used yesterday for bread. Right? In the same oven. And indeed, this is what there are descriptions, there are diaries that describe this, where people were like describing how they made matzah in their houses, and they would preheat their oven to make sure it was very hot, and they would have stone to make it even hotter, or metal plates, whatever, depending what and where, and then they would quickly make the matzah, and they would do it with great fanfare. Some would even sing Hallel. They would treat it the same way the Pesach offering was treated in the temple. Some would actually, and it seems like this was the common practice, only bake it after midday on Erev Pesach, because that's when the Pesach offering was made.
That's a time constraint.
So today it seems crazy to us. What? The bakery down there is supposed to do it. Well, actually, there are people who still do it. There are people who, Erev Pesach, after Chatzos, they get their... That's right. The Rebbe's matzah was made by Bachrim after midday on Erev Pesach, in fulfillment of this whole idea. And there are many Hasidic circles, especially, that do it, because this is old they're Ashkenazi chuvas about this,
Right.
from the early Bali Tosis, from the Tosis era, from Rashi's era, and a little even from that time. I discussed this. So Erev Pesach, after midday, just like the Korban Pesach, they're heating up their oven, and they would sing Hallel the same way they were singing Hallel in the temple while the Pesach offering was offered. And they would make matzah in their houses. Maybe a couple of neighbors get together, whoever has the biggest oven that gets hot as fastest, will all do the matzah in that guy's house. But something like that. Right? That's what the Gemara is describing here. The matzah is made quick. He heats up the oven and his wife bakes right away, as opposed to on a regular Tuesday where your wife doesn't mind taking time to let it rise. But at Pesach, it's got to be done in a rush. So this is the third and final translation of lechem ani, poor man's bread, that is made like a poor man. It's made quickly. And the other translation is it's eaten like a poor man, broken. And the other translation that you recite, it's a bread of recitation, a bread over which you recite. And tomorrow we'll look at the ingredients of the charaisis, and then we'll get to the Shulchan Aruch on all of this. Yeah.
So if there's another interpretation of lechem ani, which is not deemed to be broken, then are there some that don't break the matzah?
So it seems from the halacha that actually all three interpretations are combined. These three interpretations are not exclusive
That's
to
what
each.
everybody follows.
That's right. It's all three interpretations combined. It's made quickly.
Okay.
It has to be broken, and you recite the Haggadah over that broken matzah. That becomes the
And
halacha.
considered
That's right.
poor man's-
That's correct. The halacha becomes all three of these interpretations together.
Good try. Thank you.
Thank you very
A
much.
wonderful day.
Yeah, shut up.
Beautiful interpretation.
Thank you. Thank you, Jagan.
Such a deep meaning in so many levels.
Yeah.
You know?
The beauty is that the halacha, in its most detailed way, matches perfectly with the mystical meaning. If you understand the halacha well, you see how it stacks up very beautifully.
You can see how everything has the partners.
That's right. Yeah. It's not willy-nilly, this is the Seder is. No, there's a specific reason why you're holding it this way, you're making the bracha that way. Everything's
Yeah,
exactly
but nobody, until you hear something like this, and you
Yeah.
don't really know why you're doing it.
I mentioned that before we
Somebody
started
asks
this.
you, I don't know.
That's how God says to do. Right. So I mentioned this when we begin learning this, that if you go through this, you'll appreciate your Seder so much more because you see all the details and what went into it.
And you can answer your.
And you know what we're doing.
I actually appreciated the week recording.
Yeah, I'll close it, yeah.